Hello everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be asking, what were the main causes of the Battle of Adrianople in 378? If you're new here, please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. And just to let you know, this is part 2 of a series that I'm doing on the Battle of Adrianople. The first part talked about the run-up to the battle itself and some of the immediate causes, and you can find it in the description below if you want to watch that first. And when Valens died at Adrianople, the consensus among the Romans was that Valentinian should take over the purple. However, that wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion because remember, the empire was divided at this point and had been for almost 100 years. And there were people who wanted to keep the division and maybe even solidify it. One of those people was the usurper Maximus, who had seized control of Rome earlier in 378 and declared himself emperor. Now, to be fair to Maximus, he did do some good things during his short time as emperor. For example, he reduced taxes, and he restored the veterans' salaries that had been cut by Constantius II. He also issued a law restoring the property of those who had been confiscated by the emperor. And even though he was only in power for 3 months, he was able to debase the coinage so much that he practically bankrupted the Roman treasury. Now, while Maximus's economic policies were popular with the Roman populace, they weren't necessarily popular with the other Roman emperors. After all, how can you support a military when it doesn't get paid? And I think it's pretty obvious which side of this debate the military was on. So when news reached Rome that Constantius II had died, the legions of the West immediately proclaimed Valentinian I as emperor, while the Praetorian Guard proclaimed Maximus. But after an 11-day civil war, which ended with the murder of Maximus, the entire empire was under the control of Valentinian. However, the loyalty of these legions was suspect. Even after Valentinian arrived in Roman triumph and consolidated his rule, he still felt the need to placate them. In fact, one of his first acts as the undisputed master of the West was to pardon the soldiers who switched sides and supported Maximus. Not only that, but he also gave them command positions in the army. And this didn't go unnoticed by the Goths. They knew that Valentinian owed his throne to these men, and he was about to risk another revolt on his hands, especially not with an external threat looming on the horizon. So that brings us to the second cause of the battle, the Gothic threat. As we discussed in part 1, the Goths had crossed the Danube and invaded Roman territory. But this wasn't the first time they had done this. In fact, the Goths had been migrating into the province of Pannonia since 376. They were pushed, however, out of the province by the Huns. And if you'd like to learn more about the Huns, then check out my video on the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains in the description below. Anyway, as the Goths fled from the Huns into Pannonia, they forced the Romans to open their doors. However, the generosity of the Romans was met with resentment by the Goths because they felt that they were being treated as second-class citizens. And this was only made worse when Gratian ordered them to return to their camps after a battle with the Quadi. The Goths, feeling trapped and mistreated, turned to their charismatic leader, Fritigern, to solve their problems. And what better way to solve your problems than to start a war? I'm kidding, sort of. But that is exactly what the Goths did. And it must have been quite a sight to see these Germanic barbarians clashing against the Roman legions. After all, the Romans were supposed to be the elite fighting force of the world, right? On the one hand, you had the Huns pushing the Goths and the Burgundians and the Quadi and others into the Balkans. But on the other hand, you had the weakening of the Roman frontier forces due to the aforementioned political situation in Rome. And to make matters worse, the Roman emperors seemed intent on fighting each other instead of the real enemy. And that's precisely what was happening in the East. Constantius II was fighting his cousin, Julian, for control of the purple. And if you'd like to learn more about that, then check out my video on the death of Julian in the description below. Anyway, as a result of this fratricidal conflict, the defenses along the eastern frontier were severely lacking, and that's why the Goths were able to get through. And finally, we have the fourth cause of the battle, and that is the personality of Valens. You see, Valens was characterized by his contemporaries as being arrogant and insensitive. And that was probably what prompted him to order the execution of the Gothic leaders. But if he hoped to win over the Gothic population, he certainly wasn't doing a good job of it. After all, he could have chosen to spare the lives of the Gothic leaders and integrated them into Roman society. Instead, he chose to paint a target on their back and rally the entire Gothic population against him. That's not to say that the Goths were innocent in what happened next. They murdered the bishop of Sirmium and pillaged through Pannonia. But I think you can make the argument that none of this would have happened if Valens had shown more tact. In fact, when the Goths approached him for negotiations, he might have had the opportunity to end the conflict peacefully. After all, the Gothic demands were pretty reasonable. They wanted permission to stay in Pannonia, along with land and money. But Valens didn't want to pay them or give them land. He wanted to punish them. And that's precisely what he tried to do at Adrianople. But the result of his hubris was catastrophic. And if you want to see how it all played out, then make sure to check out the next video in this series. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. Also, if you want to learn more about the late Roman Empire, then I highly recommend checking out the series in the description below. Until next time, remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, but the Huns built it in one.